I hope that you are having a beautiful day, and you can hear my family speaking in the background, which is a bit funny. But what we are doing today, I am so honored and privileged to be interviewing Jamie Sarche. Jamie is the Director of Preplanning at Feldman Mortuary in Denver, Colorado. And today we are going to be talking about tackling the taboos that center around death and pre-planning. And it is just such an honor to have her here. So I think I might be having some connectivity issues, but I'm hoping that everyone can hear and see me. And before we begin, Jamie, I would like both of us to put an intention out there in the universe that what we are going to talk about, and that your words and these important topics, that they are going to resonate with the people that quite honestly need to hear them, and that we are going to reach people and impact them, because what you do is very, very impactful work. And I think that it's something that people don't like to think about, they don't want to talk about. And so thank you so much for being here with me today. I am super excited and
Well,
feel blessed.
I feel blessed because number one, you have such a beautiful spirit and such a curiosity and such a commitment to helping people to connect, to help them heal, to help them heal spiritually, to help them heal physically. And I just am very honored to be with you today. So thank you for having me, Lisa.
Thank you, Jamie. This means so much. And I just want to point out that it is very interesting that we're both here to talk about what we're talking about today, because I help people to restore their health, protect their health, restore their hope. And you are helping people to plan for something that is absolutely inevitable. Regardless, we are all going to die.
Of us, quite honestly, are helping people to try to live their best lives. Just like you are helping them to restore their body, to restore their mind, to restore their soul, by facing the fact that our life is finite. It gives us the ability to live more meaningfully and take advantage of everything that they're learning and getting from you.
I believe that. I love that. Thank you. Beautifully said. You were such an eloquent speaker, Jamie. I listened to some of your TED Talks, and I would just urge people that if what Jamie says resonates with you, and I'm sure that it will, to please look her up. She did TED Talks. She did an Eli talk, which was just beautiful. But let's get into, I think this is really important for people to know, what brought you to this line of work, to helping people to plan for their death?
Yeah,
it's your story.
It's a funny thing because people are always overwhelmed by the work that I do. They think that it might be very painful and difficult. And some days it is, but it's so powerful and important. And I feel so grateful. You know, not many people get to work in what their calling is. Many people probably would never know what their calling is. And I am so lucky that that is my work. I have been doing this for 12 years. And before I started at Feldman's, I quite honestly didn't know that my work existed. I didn't know anything about funerals. I didn't know about pre-planning. I just was always somebody who was good at talking about hard stuff. I like deep and authentic and meaningful conversation about the things that really matter. So I was always somebody who people would come to when they had difficult issues. I was a peer counselor. I taught about AIDS in the early 80s when that was just becoming well known. And like if friends of mine were worried about having a sexually transmitted illness or being pregnant, I was typically the one that they would turn to because they knew I could go with them into that difficulty and help them figure out what they needed to know. When I was 26, a lifelong friend of mine, Michelle, got diagnosed with a glioblastoma, which is a brain tumor that is always terminal. It's what killed John McCain. It's what killed Ted Kennedy. Sadly, I have known many, many, many people with it. And when Michelle was diagnosed, it was incredibly terrifying. And we were young people. I had a 2-year-old child. She had a 10-month-old child. We were actually planning our 10-year high school reunion together when she was diagnosed. And our friends and really gave her hope and said, you know, you're young and you're strong. You're gonna beat this thing. And I didn't do that. I really went to her many times and just said, you know, I'm here to go with you into the hard stuff. You don't have to tell me everything is going to be okay. And I don't have to tell you everything is going to be okay. We both knew it wasn't going to be okay. And the ability to connect in that real space, that gave me the ability to share everything I wanted to with her, to make sure she knew how important she was to me. And it gave her the ability to talk about the things that she was really afraid of. You know, she didn't have to pretend to be strong with me. And with a lot of other people, she did, because she didn't want to make them feel worse. And they had to pretend to be strong with her because they didn't want to make her feel worse. And so they often would talk past each other because they couldn't connect in that very deep place because it was so terrifying. And I found it powerful to connect in that deep place. And I really do feel like Michelle walked me to this work and sits with me in this work every day. And the fact that I get to talk about her all the time, she's been gone for 23 years. And yet she's so present for me. And what an incredible gift to have her with me all the time and to know that she opened this door for me.
Jamie, that is just so beautiful. I've heard you speak about Michelle in your TED Talks, and it touched me so deeply. And I really wanted you to share that story. And I love that the way that you look at it is that how amazing. Michelle is with you. She's impacted you. She's brought you through this journey, and she still lives on. She still has an impact. And you talk about her, and she's, through her, you found your purpose and you've helped other people. And also the story with Michelle, it resonates with me so much because of my own health journey. And my own health journey, you know, when my daughter was 9 months, and we're not here to talk about that, but it's facing your own mortality. That is a very difficult situation. And I can tell you that in my situation, when I was in that situation, people either said, "You're so strong, you'll get through it," or you know, and that wasn't the case for everybody. People realized, some people were okay with, you know, this is a day by day kind of thing. But I do think people like to just sugarcoat things and say that things are going to be okay. And the reality is we must have the time to process. And you gave her that time to accept that she knew she wasn't going to get through it. And she needed that. She needed to be able to just sit with that. And I think that's a big part of what you do, is that you are telling people, hey, we all die. You're not getting, I don't remember, but it was some movie or something, but you don't get out of life alive. We all die. It's
Right.
just, so how do you, so talk to me, or talk to us a little bit about, how do you get to have people feel comfortable and even be open to talking about their death,
Yeah.
and why it is so important to pre-plan.
Yeah. It's funny, for about the first 2 years that I was doing this work, I thought, how am I going to talk to people about planning ahead? Because if I do, they will I think they are going to die. And it literally was a long time. And finally, I came to this idea of, yeah, I do think they're going to die. And I'm right. I don't have a clue when that's going to be. And coming over that hump of recognizing that death is not a bad thing. It can be a painful thing, but it's not a failure. We're not meant to live forever. That was so important. And so I don't think I could continue to do this work if I hadn't come to that place, that realization. But what I do is so different from what most people who are pre-arrangement specialists, most people who do my job, they do it in a very specific way. They invite people to come for a lunch and learn. They show this PowerPoint. They talk about protecting against risk and things like that. I've never done that. What I do is have conversations with people that I would say are death adjacent, that give them the ability to talk about something that really weighs on most of us. So I have a talk that's called, What Are You Dying to Know? And that's, pretty much what we're doing today. I have a talk called The Gift of Your Presence that helps people to understand how to show up for people when they have a cancer diagnosis, how to show up for somebody who's bereaved, and to really talk about those things. And then they recognize that I'm not scary. It's safe to have a hard conversation with me. And then we get together and we talk. And the other thing that I do is I really help them to understand what are all their choices. I'm not a person who's just checking things off as they tell it to me. I ask them a lot of questions like, what are your values? And how are we going to meet those values in the disposition of your body and in the ritual that gets provided to the people who love you? And I cannot tell you how many people say to me, I don't need a funeral. When you're dead, you're dead. And I believe them. I think they're probably right. I think the dead person is fine. But the people who love them need something, and they need a path to walk on in this journey. And we can, by planning ahead, provide that to them so that they know that they are allowed to grieve. We are telling them that grieving is important and meaningful, and really the only way that we can process a loss.
That is exactly what it's about. It's not this whole process, a person that's coming to you to pre-plan, they're doing it because they love the people that they're leaving behind, and they're making the decisions to say, they're making the decisions and they're giving people permission. It's okay to grieve me. And you don't just have to go back to normal life, because things are not going to be normal. I think the rituals are so important, whatever they may be, to get us to process death. So it's really a gift to the people that you leave behind, and not having them, they can just focus on the grieving piece.
Right.
They don't have to focus on all this decision making, which is quite honestly, it is overwhelming to lose someone that you love, but then to have to make choices and think about what would that person want. But because again, it's not about really what that person would want, it's what they would want for you, how they
Right.
can support you from beyond. They're supporting you in grieving their loss, so they're still with you in that way. And I think it's beautiful.
Yes,
um
you
it's
got it. They're taking care of you even when they're not physically present to do it. And most of us spend a vast majority of our life trying to ease things for the people we love, trying to get their needs met, to help them to get their needs met. And this is a way that we can continue to do that, quite honestly, when they need it most and when they're least able to get their needs met on their own. I just had a across the street neighbor who his mom died suddenly last weekend. He called me on a Saturday morning and he said, my mom, we had no clue she was even ill. I have a sense she might have known, but she didn't share. And he said she just died and she just wants to, she told my dad she just wants to be cremated. She doesn't want anything. And I said, you know, I will help you get whatever it is that's right for your family, but I'm really going to encourage you to have a communal event, especially because this death was so very sudden. I think it's always necessary, but when someone literally just disappeared, you know, she was alive one minute and dead the next minute. It's very challenging. And he said, yeah, I think a communal event, a ritual, some kind of service would be really helpful. And he said this specifically, not to grieve, but to celebrate her life. And I had to say, it's okay to do both. You get to grieve. Your mother just died. It's okay to grieve. And I think in our society that that's weakness or that's negative or something. And what I think, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, it just like hate is not the opposite of love, indifference is, grief is what we need to do when we love someone. Grief is the mirror of the love. And grieving is good. Grieving is important. Grieving means that person mattered and the role they played in our life mattered. And trying to figure out what we're going to do next matters.
That is, again, beautiful, eloquently said. It and it does matter, and we have, and I think there are a few things that they don't touch upon in school. I mean, there's several things. I know you talk about the ninth grade psychology, and we talk about the stages of grief. Well, you know what? That doesn't prepare us for grief.
Well, and it wasn't even meant to.
No, it wasn't. But
Right.
we don't
We don't
talk about
know.
this. It's almost like we don't know how to grieve, and everybody grieves in different ways, and it's okay. There's no one right way to grieve, but you need to accept and get through the process. And you talked about something that I wanted to touch base on, and I don't remember which talk it was, but you talked about young children that they were younger than 18 and they had lost their parents. And there was this beautiful support group and they were in Utah. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I don't think most of us have any clue. And this stat is from before COVID. So I imagine it's even more now that 20% of people before the age of 18 have a parent die. I had no clue about that until I heard about the organization in Utah called the Sharing Place. And there's a place in Denver that's similar called Judy's House. There probably are places all over the country. I hope there are. And at the sharing place, the kids get together every week in a circle, and they go around and they say their name and they say what happened to their parent. And they don't say, my mom passed away. They say, my mom had heart disease. She had a heart attack and she died. My dad had terrible depression. He got a gun and he shot himself in the head and he died. They use real, anatomically correct language. And it is so important for them to do that because it normalizes it. It lets them know it's safe to talk about, and it helps them build a community with other people who've had that experience. What we often do to people is we say, don't say those real things. That makes me feel uncomfortable. And that's the other thing that we do with grieving too, is we literally say to somebody, you get a couple of days and then come back to us when you're ready. It's when you're ready to behave in a way that we feel comfortable. You know, it's really like when we put a toddler in timeout. When you can come back and behave in a way that we can accept, then you're welcome back. But until then, you go over in the corner and you grieve alone, because other people's discomfort and pain makes us so uncomfortable. And I do it too. I do it too. I mean, like I will say to somebody, how are you? When they just had somebody die, how do I think they are? They're not good. And so now I'm learning to say, how are you holding up? Or how are you doing today? And allow them to share how they are. They don't have to say to me, I'm fine. They're not fine. And it's okay not to be fine. And it's okay to cry. And it's okay to want to say that person's name. Do you know that for most people, when a loved one dies, that's really the last time they ever hear anybody use their name? Because we're afraid to talk about that person.
I would like to address that and talk about that. And I mean, there's so many things that you said, but I think that I agree with you. And from experiences, my daughter, she's only 3 years and 4 months, and she's experienced loss in her young life. And I had people say her paternal grandfather died, and I chose to bring her to the wake. And I had people say, she's little, she doesn't understand. Are you sure you want to bring her? And in my mind, I was saying, death is a part of life. And she was very young. I had her come with me. I talked about it. I'm using the word die because we can even talk about the language piece of it and all of that. We have so much that we could talk about, but it was important that she understood that there was this ritual, and the people that loved her grandpa, we get together and we look at pictures, we look at videos, and he's in the room, and that's just his body. His soul isn't there anymore, Leanna, but that's grandpa's body. And a lot of people didn't agree, but it doesn't matter, because I
Right.
feel that I want my daughter to understand it. We talk about her uncle died. I've mentioned many times, we'll look at pictures, and we've had animals that have
Yes.
died, and she wants to see their videos, and she talks about them, and she says that they're here and may she see them. I really hope that's true, but
Yeah.
never do I want my daughter to think that when someone dies, that's the end, that they don't go on some way through our memories, that they stop participating in our life. I don't want that for my daughter. So that's why I choose to do that. And I hope that people really understand what you're saying. Talk about your loved ones, or it is so much more painful, because when they're gone, then they're really gone if you never say their name again.
Right. Right. Say their name. Take your children. You did exactly the right thing, because I think of death just like how we talk about sex. You know, a generation or two ago, we would use euphemisms to talk about our children's bodies. We would talk about their pee-pee and their wee-wee and their hoo-ha, because that made us feel more comfortable. And the cutesy names they didn't make us have to acknowledge that our children are sexual beings. And so that just felt better to us. But what really happened is it told our children that their body parts are shameful, their body parts are weird, and they shouldn't talk about them. And God forbid they be touched in an inappropriate way by someone, or they get some sort of infection or whatever. They need to have the language and the permission to talk about it. And this is exactly what we continue to do with death. We don't say the word die. We say someone passed away, or even just passed. We don't acknowledge the pain of it. We don't want to acknowledge the reality of it. Like, I find it fascinating that people will share that someone they loved had a horrible accident, and then they say they passed. Like, that doesn't feel to me that passing is right. And even if you believe they've transitioned to another place, and quite honestly, I do believe that, but they still died. This physical body still died. And allowing our children and ourselves to acknowledge that, to practice grieving. When you have a funeral for an animal, they get to practice, and they get to learn that it's safe to engage in this kind of emotion. We don't have to shove it away. We don't have to shove it down. We don't have to pretend that it's not there. We can acknowledge that it's painful and it's spiraling. It's not a linear progression. You know, there's not that denial, anger, bargaining, whatever. That never was about grieving. That was about anticipating our own death. So we do so much better if we can just engage with this and realize it's not negative. It might be painful, but that's not the same as bad. And so engaging with it is powerful and empowering. And that's what we need to learn to do.
Jamie, thank you. And of course now my daughter is coming in. Okay, so that is okay. Grandma, we are live on Facebook.
I
So
know, I'm listening. Hi.
okay. Oh,
She's so
geez.
interesting.
Hi.
Okay, and this is
I love
Leanna.
listening to you.
And Mom, that's okay. So Jamie, this is my daughter, Leanna.
Leanna, say
Hi.
Can you say hi?
She's
Can you
falling
say hi?
asleep.
We're having a conversation.
She's good.
We are having a conversation right now. We're talking about death, and we're talking about like when Grandpa died and we went to the funeral, and we're talking about Marley and Enzo and Nikki, how they died, and Maggie too. So that's what we're talking about. And we're talking about how it's so important for people to talk about this, because we know that it's so sad. It's so sad when people die and when our animals die, but that we keep talking about them. So they are still here. They're still here with us. And
We're so lucky to have had them and to have loved them.
And we know that, and we know that, and we've had some rituals with our animals, which we can talk about at a different time. But Jamie, I did have some other questions for you, just
Yes, please.
A few more minutes. And I have to tell you, I'm not great with technology, so I really wanted to involve the people that are on Facebook Live, and just I hope everybody, thank you for your patience. If you have questions, I wanted to go back and forth, and I'm having a hard time doing that, but I will make sure to get Jamie your questions. So I guess something that I wanted to ask you, because we talked about this, is something that I had always thought about is environmental considerations. So when we think about when we want to pre-plan and we decide whether it's that we want to be cremated or we want to be buried. So can you take us through some of those options and how they impact the environment?
I would love to. Thanks for that question. It's so important because people have a lot of myths about this. The vast majority of people I run into will say, if they are environmental, they'll say, I want to be cremated because I don't want to take up space. And so I always ask, and it's funny how they always use the same language. So I want people to understand that cremation, fire cremation, is not an environmentally sustainable practice. It is actually very bad for the environment. Burning is not good. You know how we used to burn leaves and trash, and now we compost. And there are a few ways that we can care for our bodies in the most natural way, where they also can care for the environment. So green burial is always my preference. I am a big believer in burying the body with no embalming, an all wood casket or no casket if the cemetery will allow that. Many cemeteries will allow that. In that case, the body quickly decomposes and becomes the trees and the grass and the bushes and the flowers, and it feeds the earth. And it's really pretty quick depending on the water table. I mean, I would say like a couple of years. And the reason that I find that to be the gold standard is it takes care of the earth and it gives our loved ones a place to go if they need it. Generations hence, it allows people to know that we existed. So it's great for genealogical research. It's just memorialization is important from a human perspective. So that is the gold standard. Then there are some other choices. There is something called alkaline hydrolysis, also known as aquamation or water cremation, and that is good for the earth. And it's much more gentle than fire cremation. The body is placed in a vessel with water, and then an alkali similar to liquid soap is added. Heat is added, and the tissue quickly dissolves. The solvent, the solution that comes from that, is a fertilizer. It can be taken to a farm. One of the places in Denver that does it takes the solution directly to a flower farm, and it's really good for the flower's growth. And then the bones are left, similar to fire cremation. The bones get processed. That's what we think of as ash. And those cremated remains that are done with this process, with the water cremation, are fertilizer. When they're done in a fire cremation, they actually can kill the plants that they land on or are buried under. So fire cremation is just not environmentally sustainable in any way. Water cremation is that similar thing, but very sustainable. The next thing that is just becoming legal in several places, Colorado is the second place to make it legal, is called natural organic reduction. A brand name for it is Recompose. It was created in Washington State. It's actually been used in agriculture for a long, long, long time, where the body is placed in a vessel along with wood chips and alfalfa. Air is circulated, and literally in 6 to 8 weeks, the body becomes compost. So everything in the body goes away. That can really be a wonderful thing. But what's missing to me is the ability to go visit, the memorialization. So that's a conversation to have of what do we want to do in that way? How do we meet those human needs? The other thing that's interesting about it is the compost that's created is a lot. So like one person becomes a whole truck bed full of compost. So for most of us, that's too much. And so we have to figure out where will all that compost go. In Washington State, my understanding is it's going to forest preserves if they'll take it, or a park. One of the organizations bought a park. So these are things we have to figure out. But that is also a very environmentally sustainable way to care for a body. Another choice is donating to a medical school. You can do that. It's not very environmentally sustainable because the body is embalmed and then cremated, but there's some added values if you want to do that. Again, you got to think about the ritual needs of your loved ones. And one caveat with that is be very careful who you donate to. Donating to a medical school really is a donation, but there are for-profit companies that they say you're donating, but then they sell your body, and they're not real transparent about that. And so I have a lot of trouble with that. So there's just lots of choices. And what happens if we don't plan ahead, our loved ones will often get on what I refer to as the path of least resistance. And that is because they are overwhelmed and they are financially and emotionally burdened. And so they often just say, we just got to get rid of this body. We got a dead body we got to get rid of. We're just going to have it cremated. And they typically do fire cremation because it's the cheapest. And then they don't have any ritual and they don't meet their needs. And they often at that time don't even know they have needs. And so if we can provide them a plan, and maybe fire cremation is the plan, if that's what we want, and we've thought it through and we've made an educated decision, that's fine, but plan.
It's kind of overwhelming. I'm thinking about all of the choices that are out there, and some other questions came into my mind, and I know we're going a little long. I hope that's okay, Jamie. And yes. I was listening the entire time. I just have to make sure she's not drawing on some of my work papers.
I drew.
But yes, you drew very well. I bet you didn't expect this kind of conversation.
I love it.
So a couple of things I wanted to ask you. So when people do fire cremation, this means that they really shouldn't be putting those ashes into the environment, of course. So, and I just want that to be said. I want that to be put out there, because I know a lot of times people want to spread the ashes or put them in the ocean or put them in the ground with a tree. This will kill a tree. But however, if they do the water cremation or did you call it recompost?
Recompose, but that or natural organic reduction, but that's not ready.
Not yet. Okay.
And there are some ways, if they want to do fire cremation, there are some ways. There's this thing called a bio urn that it's something about the pH. So it does some sort of chemical reaction that helps ameliorate that issue. So it's really worth having that conversation about if you're going to do fire cremation, what matters to you around it.
And just, again, there's so many factors, and my daughter is going to speak so much in the background, but again, this is why pre-planning, so that your loved ones don't have to make these decisions.
Right.
You are making them. And maybe the last thing that I would like to touch upon, because you did talk about this, and I think it's really relevant. You talked about the rituals and the different rituals and what really helps us to grieve. So can you talk a bit about Jewish tradition and rituals? Because I've been brought up from, we've had multiple religions in my home, and I am familiar. And I do believe the Jewish rituals and traditions are just absolutely beautiful. And my grandfather, we went through so many of those rituals, and it was beautiful. And I understand why so many of them are done. Can you talk a bit about that?
I would love to. Thank you for asking. And I think you touch upon something that's so important, that religion has a lot of ritual, but ritual is an existence on its own and is valuable on its own and doesn't have to be connected with religion. So many people say to me, I don't want a funeral. And I think what I'm thinking is, I don't want some guy at the front of the church doing this big thing and having a visitation and having a rosary and having this, and this. But I'm suggesting that having something, a communal event, you don't have to have a rabbi, you don't have to have a priest, you have somebody in charge because that's important, but it can look a lot of different ways. And you're right, Jewish tradition has a lot of ritual around this. And I am just constantly overwhelmed by how healing it is. And for me, it doesn't have a lot to do with God. It has a lot to do with our human need to grieve. And Judaism really says this isn't a celebration of life. This is painful, and it's okay to recognize that it's painful. So Jewish tradition says don't embalm, use an all-wood casket. The goal is to go back to the earth. The goal is to take care of the body with kindness, compassion, modesty, dignity. That's also why we bury. That's why we bury very quickly, because decomposition happens very quickly. From a spiritual perspective, we bury quickly because the spirit, the soul can't rest or go to wherever it's supposed to go until it's buried. It hangs around until it's buried. And at a Jewish funeral where someone is buried, we literally shovel the dirt into the grave. It is our obligation as the community to bury our loved one. It is not our obligation to go back and visit them at the cemetery if we don't want to, but it is our obligation to bury them. And a beautiful poet who is also a funeral director named Thomas Lynch talks about that the burial takes our loved ones from where they are to where they need to be. And in that process, we take ourselves from where we are to where we need to be. So when we're shoveling the dirt, we hear it hitting the casket, and it is painful and it is visceral. We are feeling it deep in our bodies, and it helps to move the grief. It helps us to access the grief, to help it to get going. And that's important. It's better to let it out. And then after the burial, we have a 7-day period called Shiva. And that is a time in which we are not responsible for anything except to process our grief. We're not expected to even shower. That's often, I think, why you hear people cover the mirrors, because they don't want to look at themselves. And we're just not supposed to be very aware of our outer self. We're really supposed to be focused on our inner selves and our needs, and spending time with the community and our loved ones, telling stories and just trying to figure out what comes next for us emotionally. Then we have Shloshim, which is a 30-day period after the death. And we're going back to work at that time, but we're really not going to concerts and we're not going to parties. And really in those 30 days, we probably don't want to. You know, we need some time to be a little bit closed off. And the traditions tell us that that is right. They give us that excuse to do what we might need emotionally. Then we have another 11 months of just processing, just acknowledging our new status without this person and trying to figure out what our new normal is going to look like. And at that 12-month period, we have something called the yard site, which is the anniversary of somebody's death. And we acknowledge that every year. And it really just keeps them present for us, keeps their memory alive. And what I think is it really acknowledges that grief doesn't end. it gets less powerful sometimes. You know, we might be able to see it coming better and know that we'll get through it better as we get further past it. But some days it might just hit us in the face like a Mack truck, and that's okay. I actually just experienced this the other day where I was talking to somebody about my grandfather who's been dead for 30 years, and it just smacked me in the face. And sometimes that happens to me about Michelle, that it just smacks me in the face. And I feel grateful for those opportunities to just get in touch, because again, that's about love and that's about connection. And it's powerful and important. And so while I am not a religious Jewish person, I am somebody who just really values those traditions. And quite honestly, they're not just for Jews. Anybody can access that kind of, you know, path to walk on, and we can provide that for our loved ones.
I love that you made that distinction, that basically that it's rituals. Yes, there are religious rituals, but there are rituals just related to when people die, what we do for grieving, and that it doesn't matter what our religion is, that we can actually access and we can pick and choose what rituals make sense for us. And I just love that you made that distinction. Thank you so much, Jamie. And I'm thinking, well, an important question before we go is, and it's something that's on my mind. We actually talked about this. Well, if somebody was to pre-plan, say that someone came to you in Denver, Colorado, and they pre-planned with you, they already know what they want to do, but then they move across the country, what happens? What happens? So we talked about this, so please.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. So many funeral homes, and mine specifically does this, they fund the plan with an insurance product. And we don't get paid until we actually do the service. So if you move away, the plan goes with you. And it's really a smart thing to do. I will give one caveat. Like if you're going to say to me, I'm going to move in a year, I would say, just go make the plan then, depending on your age and what's happening for you. But if you're saying, I just want to have that contingency in case, then this is a great idea to do it. And the only reason that I give that sort of caveat of if you're going to move really soon, wait to do it at your new place, is that when you do it with the funeral home you're actually going to use, most likely, they lock in today's prices. So if you do it with Feldman Mortuary and down the road you move, all the money that you paid into the plan is available to you. But the funeral home, wherever you go, might not say, we're going to go back to Feldman Mortuary's 2021 prices and we're going to honor those. They might not. I will say, if you move, you can negotiate with another funeral home and they really want your business. So they're likely to say, okay, yeah, that'll work for us. And I can always help with that too. So planning ahead, knowing you're never going to lose that money is there for your use no matter what, is so very smart. And what you do when you plan is you've given your loved ones a gift. You've taken the emotional burden from them. You've taken the financial burden from them. And what you've said to them is, I want you to have the time you need to be in your feelings. You don't have to step out of your feelings to do all the pragmatic stuff, because I've done that for you.
Jamie, thank you again so much. This was just, I feel like this was enlightening. I feel like this will get some people to think about these topics that nobody wants to talk about, like finances and how their health is and all of these other taboo topics that people aren't talking about. So I am just so grateful for this opportunity to have you here. and with me, and also to have you meet my daughter. So
Yeah.
how can people get in touch with you? What is for the people that are in Denver, Colorado, or even if they aren't in the Denver, Colorado area, can they reach out to you? So if you can talk about
Absolutely. Absolutely. They can connect with me on LinkedIn. They can email me at Jamie, Jamie, at feldmanmortuary.com. They can just Google my name and they'll find a lot of ways to connect with me. And I would be honored to chat with them about anything they're wondering about. And if they don't live in the Denver area, I can help them connect with someone in their area who can help them put these plans into place.
Perfect. I will make sure to put all of your connection information into the post, and any last parting words, and no pun intended at all, but anything that you think, just closing, if anybody was to get one thing from this, what would you want them to get from this?
Thank you for asking, and thank you for doing this with me today. I would say that the most important thing for people to walk away with is that it is safe to have this conversation. It doesn't make anything happen. It just makes things a lot easier when they do happen. So please learn to talk about this. Death is not a failure. It is part of our life. And it is a very important part of our life. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to push my message about that.
Thank you, Jamie. I cannot thank you enough. And what I'm hoping is that people have questions. And if they do, maybe we can do a follow-up interview. So, but may everybody that needed to hear your words, your message, may they be listening now, listening in the future. May people share this with their loved ones, because these are important conversations to have. So with that, I would like to thank everyone so much for watching, and especially Jamie, for you. And if you can hang on for 1 minute, and many blessings to everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and have a beautiful day. Thank you. And this is going to be the hard part,